They gambled with her life like it was nothing. The town made a bet the day they sent Abigail Monroe to Rowan Hale's ranch. How long before she'd come crawling back, or worse, not come back at all? A fragile girl versus a man they whispered about in fear. Everyone knew what happened to people who crossed his land. Everyone expected her to break. But what happened next shattered everything they thought they knew about survival, about strength, about the girl they'd thrown away like garbage. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The morning they decided Abigail's fate, she wasn't even in the room. Mrs. Henrietta Cranshaw sat at the head of the boarding house dining table, her thick fingers drumming against the wood like a judge delivering sentence. Around her, 3 other women, permanent residents who'd lived there long enough to believe they owned opinions about everyone else's business, nodded along to whatever poison she was serving. "The girl's been here 4 months without paying a cent," Mrs. Cranshaw announced, her voice carrying the particular satisfaction of someone who enjoyed other people's misfortune. "I've been charitable, patient even, but charity doesn't put food on my table." "She does work for her keep," offered Mrs. Beatrice Yates, though her voice held no real conviction. Beatrice was soft in ways that made her dangerous, the type who'd agree with cruelty while wringing her hands about it. "Work?" Mrs. Cranshaw's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "She scrubs floors like a child and burns half the laundry. I could hire any girl from town who'd do twice the job for half the space she takes up." Abigail heard all of this from the kitchen, where she stood with her hands submerged in dishwater so hot it turned her skin pink. She'd learned months ago that being invisible meant being still, being quiet, letting their words wash over her like she wasn't even human enough to be hurt by them. She was 22 years old and had nothing. No family. Her mother had died of fever when she was 19. Her father had disappeared into a bottle years before that. No money. What little they'd had went to doctors who couldn't save her mother anyway. No prospects. She'd been raised to be quiet and useful, skills that got you exploited, not employed. The boarding house had been her last option. Mrs. Cranshaw had taken her in with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind that said, "I'll use you until you're empty, then throw you out." 4 months of scrubbing, cooking, cleaning, hauling water, mending clothes, polishing silver that wasn't even tarnished. 4 months of sleeping in a closet-sized room that was more storage space than living quarters. 4 months of eating scraps after everyone else had finished, of wearing the same 2 dresses until the fabric grew thin at the elbows. 4 months of waiting for this exact moment. "There's the Hale Ranch," someone said. Abigail couldn't see who, probably Constance Miller, who had a talent for saying terrible things in a helpful voice. The kitchen went quiet. Even from where she stood, Abigail felt the shift in the air. "You can't be serious," Beatrice whispered. "Why not?" Constance's voice brightened with the thrill of a genuinely awful idea. "He put out word last month he needed help. Offered wages, room and board. No one's taken him up on it." "Because everyone with sense knows better," Mrs. Cranshaw said. But there was consideration in her tone now. Calculation. "The girl needs work. He needs workers. Seems practical to me." Abigail's hand stilled in the water. She knew the name Hale. Everyone in Cedar Ridge knew that name the way you knew about storms or wolves, something dangerous you avoided if you could. Rowan Hale owned land 15 miles outside town, a sprawling ranch that had belonged to his family for generations. His father had been difficult, his grandfather worse, but Rowan himself had a reputation that made people cross the street when they saw him coming. The stories varied depending on who told them. Some said he'd killed a man in a fight over water rights. Others claimed he'd beaten a horse thief so badly the man never walked right again. A few whispered about a woman who'd gone to work for him and left 3 days later, refusing to speak about what happened. What everyone agreed on was simple. Rowan Hale was unpredictable, violent, and best left alone. "You'd send her out there to die," Beatrice said, but again, there was no strength in it. "I'd send her out there to work," Mrs. Cranshaw corrected. "What happens after that is her own business. She's a grown woman, isn't she? Old enough to make her own choices." Except Abigail hadn't been given choices in months, maybe years. She pulled her hands from the water, dried them on her apron, and walked into the dining room before she could think better of it. 4 faces turned toward her. Mrs. Cranshaw's expression shifted to something almost pleased. She'd been hoping for an audience. "Abigail," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. We were just discussing your situation. I heard. Then you understand the position we're in. I simply can't continue to. I'll go. The words came out steady. Abigail was surprised by that. Inside, everything felt like it was shaking apart, but her voice didn't break. Mrs. Cranshaw blinked. Go where, dear? To the ranch. Hale's ranch. You're right. I need work. If he's offering wages and a place to stay, I'll go. She watched something flicker across Mrs. Cranshaw's face. Disappointment, maybe. The woman had wanted her to beg, to cry, to make it entertaining. Do you understand what you're agreeing to? Constance asked, leaning forward. That man is dangerous, Abigail finished. I know what people say. It's not just talk, Beatrice insisted, finding her voice now that someone else's life was on the line. Martha Cowan worked for him last spring. She came back and wouldn't speak for days. Whatever happened out there? Whatever happened to Martha Cowan is her business, Abigail interrupted. This is mine. The truth was simpler than any of them knew. Abigail had stopped being afraid of things that might kill her. She'd spent too long living in ways that were already killing her slowly. The humiliation, the hunger, the endless days of being nothing to anyone. If Rowan Hale was violent, at least it would be quick. If he wasn't, maybe she'd finally have something that belonged to her, even if it was just wages for honest work. Mrs. Cranshaw recovered quickly, her smile returning. Well, how decisive of you. I'll send word to Mr. Hale that you're available. I'm sure he'll be pleased to have the help. The way she said pleased made it sound like a threat. When do I leave? Abigail asked. Tomorrow morning. I'll arrange for Mr. Patterson to take you in his wagon. He delivers supplies out that way. 24 hours. Abigail nodded and turned back to the kitchen before anyone could see her hands start to shake. That night, she packed everything she owned into a canvas bag that had belonged to her mother. 2 dresses, 1 shawl, a comb, a small photograph of her parents on their wedding day, and a book of poetry she'd read so many times the pages were soft as fabric. It didn't take long. She lay in her narrow bed, really just a cot pushed against the wall, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw tomorrow. The wagon ride, the ranch, the man everyone feared. What would he look like? Would he be cruel immediately, or would it creep up on her slowly? Would she last a week? A day? Stop. She forced her mind somewhere else. Anywhere else. Her mother used to say that fear was just your imagination working overtime, creating problems that hadn't happened yet. Deal with what's in front of you, she'd said once, when they'd had no money for rent and no idea where their next meal was coming from. The rest will come when it comes. They'd survive that time, and the next one, and the one after that, until they didn't. Abigail turned on her side and pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. At least she'd face it standing. Mr. Patterson arrived at dawn with a wagon that had seen better decades. He was a squat man with a gray beard and eyes that wouldn't quite meet hers when Mrs. Cranshaw brought Abigail out to the street. This the girl? He asked, like she wasn't standing right there. This is Miss Monroe, Mrs. Cranshaw confirmed. She's expected at the Hale Ranch. Patterson's expression did something complicated. Expected. Right. He didn't help her into the wagon. Abigail climbed up herself, settling on the wooden bench beside him with her bag in her lap. Mrs. Cranshaw stood on the porch, watching. She didn't wave goodbye. The wagon lurched forward, and Cedar Ridge began to fall away behind them. They rode in silence for the first hour. The road out of town was rutted and rough, cutting through farmland that gradually gave way to wilder country, rolling hills covered in tall grass, scattered trees, the occasional creek bed. It was beautiful in a way that made Abigail's chest ache. She'd spent so long looking at walls and floors that she'd forgotten what open sky looked like. You know what you're getting into? Patterson asked suddenly. Abigail glanced at him. Does anyone? He grunted. Fair point, but that place, that man, there's reasons no one works for him. I heard the stories. Stories ain't the half of it. Patterson shifted the reins in his hands. I've known the Hale family my whole life. Rowan's grandfather was mean as a snake. His father wasn't much better. Rowan himself. He trailed off. What about him? He's got his father's temper and his grandfather's pride. Bad combination. Couple years back, he caught some boys stealing cattle. Beat one of them so bad the kid still got a limp. Did they steal from him? Patterson frowned. Well, yeah, but then maybe he had a reason. Reason and right ain't always the same thing, girl. Abigail didn't respond. She knew he was trying to warn her, maybe even scare her into turning back. But there was nowhere to turn back to. The miles stretched on. The sun climbed higher, turning the morning cool into midday heat. Abigail's dress stuck to her back, and dust from the road coated her throat. Finally, Patterson pointed ahead. There. At first, Abigail couldn't see anything except more grassland. Then, gradually, structures emerged from the landscape. A main house, a barn, several smaller outbuildings, corrals with fencing that looked recently repaired. The ranch was bigger than she'd expected, more established, and isolated. There wasn't another building visible in any direction. Patterson pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. It was a simple structure, 2 stories with a wide porch, built from timber that had weathered gray. Not fancy, but solid, permanent. Well, Patterson said. Here you are. Abigail climbed down, her legs stiff from the ride. She turned to thank him, but he was already turning the wagon around. Wait, aren't you? I got deliveries in town to make before dark, he said quickly. You take care, Miss Monroe. He was afraid. She could see it in the way he wouldn't look at the house, and how quickly he snapped the reins to get the horses moving. The wagon disappeared back down the road, leaving Abigail standing alone in the yard with her bag and the sound of her own heartbeat loud in her ears. The ranch was quiet. Too quiet. Then the front door opened. The man who stepped out was nothing like what Abigail had imagined. She'd expected someone older, maybe weathered and mean-looking. Instead, Rowan Hale looked about 30, tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that assessed her with an intensity that made her want to step back. He wasn't handsome. His features were too sharp for that, his jaw too hard, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. But there was something about him that commanded attention, something that made the space around him feel charged. He stopped at the edge of the porch and looked at her. Abigail looked back. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Rowan spoke. You're the girl Cranshaw sent. It wasn't a question, but Abigail answered anyway. Yes. You know what the work is? No. His eyebrows rose slightly. You came anyway? I needed work. You needed help. Mrs. Cranshaw made the arrangement. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, gone too quickly to be sure. Cranshaw made the arrangement, right. He came down the steps, moving with the kind of controlled ease that suggested he was stronger than he looked. Let me be clear about something. I didn't ask for you specifically. I asked for workers. Plural. People who know ranch work. I can learn. Can you? He stopped a few feet away, studying her. You ever worked on a ranch before? No. You know anything about horses, cattle, fencing, irrigation? No? Then what exactly can you do? The question should have felt cruel, but his tone was more curious than cutting, like he genuinely wanted to know what possessed her to come out here. Abigail lifted her chin. I can work hard. I can follow instructions. And I don't quit. Everyone quits eventually. Then I guess you'll find out if I'm different. They stared at each other. Abigail refused to look away first, even though everything in her wanted to. There was something unsettling about his gaze, not violent exactly, but measuring, like he was seeing past whatever front she was trying to maintain and finding something underneath worth testing. Cranshaw send you out here as a joke? He asked finally. The question caught her off guard. What? You heard me. That woman's got a mean streak. Wouldn't surprise me if she sent you out here thinking it'd be funny. Soft girl, hard work. See how long before she breaks. Heat crawled up Abigail's neck. Maybe she did, but I'm still here. For now. For as long as you'll have me. Rowan's expression shifted into something she couldn't read. The last person I hired lasted 3 days. The one before that, a week. You really think you'll do better? I don't think anything. I just know I need this. Need and want are different things. I need it, Abigail repeated, harder this time. Another long silence. Then Rowan turned and started walking toward the barn. Come on. Abigail grabbed her bag and followed. The barn was massive inside, sectioned into stalls and storage areas. It smelled like hay and leather and animals. A few horses poked their heads out as they passed, curious. Rowan stopped at what looked like a tack room. "You'll sleep here for now. There's a cot, a trunk for your things. Outhouse is behind the main house. Water pumps in the yard." Abigail looked around. The room was small but clean, with a narrow window that let in dusty light. The cot had a mattress that looked thin but functional. It was better than the boarding house closet. "Thank you," she said. Rowan ignored that. "Work starts at dawn. You'll help with feeding, cleaning stalls, whatever else needs doing. Midday meal is at noon, evening meal at sunset. You eat what I eat, same time. Wages are $5 a week plus room and board." $5. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in months. "Any questions?" Rowan asked. "What happened to the others?" He went still. "What others?" "The people who didn't last, what made them leave?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "They figured out ranch work is harder than they thought, and I'm not interested in coddling people who can't handle it. I won't need coddling. We'll see." He started to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing. I don't tolerate lying, stealing, or laziness. Break any of those rules, you're gone. Understand?" "Yes." "Good. Get settled. We start tomorrow." He left before she could respond. Abigail stood alone in the tack room, her bag still in her hands, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. This was it. This was where she'd be. She set her bag on the cot and started unpacking. Dawn came cold and gray. Abigail woke to the sound of a rooster somewhere in the distance, and closer, the low sound of cattle. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all rushed back, the ranch, Rowan, the work starting today. She dressed quickly in the dark, her fingers clumsy with nerves, and stepped outside. The yard was already alive with activity. Rowan was at the corral, working with one of the horses, his movements confident and easy. He saw her and jerked his head toward the barn. "Feed and water," he called. "Buckets are by the door. Don't overfeed." Abigail found the buckets and the feed, heavy sacks of grain that she had to drag across the floor. Her arms burned by the time she'd distributed enough to each stall. The horses were bigger up close than she'd expected. One of them, a massive black gelding, pinned his ears back when she approached. "Easy," she whispered, though she had no idea if that was right. The horse snorted but took the feed. Water was worse. The buckets were heavy, even empty, impossible when full. Abigail made trip after trip from the pump to the barn, her shoulders screaming, her hands already starting to blister. By the time she finished, the sun was fully up and she was covered in sweat despite the cool air. Rowan appeared in the barn doorway. "Done?" "Yes." He walked through, checking each stall. Abigail held her breath, waiting for criticism. He didn't say anything, just nodded and moved on to the next task. The day blurred into endless motion, mucking stalls, which meant hauling wheelbarrows full of manure and soiled hay to a pile behind the barn, repairing a section of fence where the wire had come loose, hauling more water, this time for the cattle troughs. Rowan worked alongside her, but he didn't talk. He demonstrated once, expected her to keep up, and corrected her only when she was about to do something dangerous. "Not like that," he snapped when she tried to hammer a fence post. "You'll break your damn thumb. Here." He took the hammer, showed her the angle, handed it back. She tried again. Better. "Good enough," he said, and walked away. Lunch was bread, cheese, and water eaten standing in the yard because there wasn't time to sit. Abigail's hand shook as she ate, her whole body already exhausted. The afternoon was worse. Rowan had her help move hay bales from a storage loft to the barn floor, heavy, awkward work that left her gasping and dizzy. Then there was more fence repair, more water hauling, more endless tasks that seemed designed to break her. By the time the sun started sinking, Abigail could barely stand. Rowan finally called a halt. "That's enough for today." Abigail nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked back to the main house in silence. Rowan went inside and came back out a few minutes later with 2 plates of food, stew, bread, something that might have been carrots. He handed her 1 plate without comment and sat on the porch steps. Abigail sat beside him, too tired to care about propriety. The stew was simple but good. She ate mechanically, her brain too foggy to taste much. "You're slower than I need," Rowan said after a while. Abigail's stomach dropped. I'll get faster. Will you? Yes. He didn't sound convinced. Tomorrow's going to be harder. I can handle it. You say that now. I mean it. Rowan looked at her, that same measuring expression from yesterday. Why are you really here? And don't give me that line about needing work. Everyone needs work. Most people wouldn't come here for it. Abigail set her plate down. Her hands were shaking again, and she didn't want him to see. I didn't have anywhere else to go, she said quietly. Mrs. Cranshaw made it clear I wasn't welcome at the boarding house anymore. This was the only option she gave me. So she did send you as a joke. Maybe, but I'm not laughing. Rowan was quiet for a moment, then he said, People talk about me in town. You hear what they say? Yes. And you came anyway? Yes. Why? Abigail met his eyes. Because I stopped being afraid of things that might happen and started being more afraid of staying where I was. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or respect. He stood, collecting both plates. Get some sleep. Tomorrow starts at dawn, whether you're ready or not. I'll be ready. He paused at the door. We'll see. The first week nearly killed her. Every morning, Abigail woke with muscles screaming and hands that had blistered, bled, and blistered again. Every day she pushed through work that left her shaking and sick. Rowan didn't ease up. If anything, he pushed harder, testing her maybe, or trying to break her the way he'd broken the others. But Abigail didn't break. She learned to lift without destroying her back. She learned to handle the horses without flinching when they tossed their heads. She learned to read Rowan's silences, to know when he wanted help and when he wanted to be left alone. She learned that he wasn't cruel, just demanding. He expected competence, effort, and honesty. Nothing more, but absolutely nothing less. By the second week, she was faster, stronger. By the third, Rowan stopped checking her work. They still barely spoke. Conversations were functional. Bring the wire cutters. Water's low in the south pasture. Stew's on the stove. But something was shifting. Abigail felt it in the way Rowan sometimes nodded when she finished a task correctly and how he started leaving her plate of food on the porch steps without waiting for her to ask. Small things. But for someone who'd spent months being invisible, small things mattered. One evening, about a month in, they were sitting on the porch after dinner when Rowan spoke without prompting. You're not what I expected. Abigail looked up from her plate. What did you expect? Someone who'd quit by now. Sorry to disappoint. The corner of his mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. I didn't say I was disappointed. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd gotten from him. That night, Abigail lay in her cot feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. She was doing this. Actually doing it. For the first time since her mother died, she felt like maybe she could survive more than just existing. Maybe she could build something. Then the town found out. It started with Martha Cowan. Abigail was in town for supplies. Her first trip back since arriving at the ranch 6 weeks earlier. Rowan had given her a list and money, told her to take the wagon, and warned her to be back before dark. She'd expected stares. What she hadn't expected was the silence. The general store went quiet when she walked in. Conversations died mid-sentence. Mrs. Henshaw, who ran the place with her husband, looked up from the counter and her expression went cold. Miss Monroe, she said, her voice flat. Didn't expect to see you again. Abigail set the list on the counter. I need these items, please. Mrs. Henshaw picked up the list like it might be contaminated. This is quite a lot. It's what Mr. Hale needs. I'm sure it is. The woman's eyes traveled over Abigail slowly, taking in the worn dress, the sun-darkened skin, the calluses visible on her hands. You're still out there, then? At the ranch? Yes. How industrious of you. There was something in her tone that made Abigail's spine straighten. Not quite accusation, but close. Behind her, someone whispered. Abigail didn't turn around. Mrs. Henshaw began gathering items from the shelves with deliberate slowness. Each movement felt calculated to make Abigail wait, to make her uncomfortable. Martha Cowan came by last week, Mrs. Henshaw said casually, measuring out flour. Poor thing, she's finally starting to talk about her time at that ranch. Abigail's jaw tightened. Is that so? Oh, yes. Terrible things she's been through, absolutely terrible. Of course, she had the sense to leave when she did. I'm not Martha Cowan. No. Mrs. Henshaw's smile was sharp. You're certainly not. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Abigail paid for the supplies, loaded them into the wagon, and left without saying another word. But she felt eyes on her the entire time, watching from windows, from doorways, from the street corner where a group of men had gathered. On the ride back to the ranch, her hands shook on the reins. When she arrived, Rowan was in the corral working with a young mare. He looked up as Abigail pulled the wagon to a stop. "Everything go all right?" he called. "Fine," Abigail lied. She unloaded the supplies quickly, trying to ignore the sick feeling in her stomach. Whatever Martha Cowan had been saying, whatever the town was thinking, it didn't matter. She had work to do. But that night, sitting on the porch after dinner, she couldn't stay quiet. "What happened with Martha Cowan?" she asked. Rowan, who'd been staring out at the darkening hills, went still. "What about her?" "People in town keep bringing her up. Mrs. Henshaw said she's been talking about her time here. I'm sure she has." His voice was carefully neutral. "What happened?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She came here expecting easy work and special treatment. When she didn't get it, she left. That's all." "That's not what people think happened. People think what they want to think." He stood, collecting the dinner plates. "Don't let town gossip get in your head. It's hard not to when they look at me like I'm—" Abigail stopped. "Like you're what? Like I'm doing something wrong just by being here." Rowan's expression darkened. "You're working for wages on a ranch. There's nothing wrong with that. They don't see it that way. Then they're idiots." He went inside, the door closing harder than necessary behind him. Abigail sat alone on the porch, watching the stars come out. She'd known people would talk. She just hadn't realized how much it would bother her, how much it would feel like the boarding house all over again, being judged and found wanting. But this time she wasn't doing anything wrong. She was working, surviving. That should be enough. It had to be enough. The next week, Rowan rode into town himself. He came back late, his expression thunderous. "What happened?" Abigail asked when he dismounted. "Nothing that concerns you. If it's about me, it concerns me." He turned on her, and for the first time she saw real anger in his face. "You want to know what happened? Fine. I went to the feed store. Carl Henderson refused to serve me, said he doesn't do business with my kind anymore." "Your kind?" "Men who exploit young women, apparently. That's what half the town thinks I'm doing, keeping you out here against your will, taking advantage of you." Abigail felt heat crawl up her neck. "That's insane. That's gossip. Martha Cowan's been telling anyone who'll listen that I'm dangerous, that she barely escaped with her dignity intact. Now you're here, and people are putting two and two together and getting 50. So what do we do?" "We?" Rowan's laugh was bitter. "You don't do anything. You keep your head down and do your work. This is my problem. It's my reputation, too. You think you have a reputation worth protecting? You came here with nothing. If you leave, you'll leave with nothing. At least here you have wages and a place to sleep." The words hit harder than he probably meant them to. Abigail stepped back like she'd been struck. Rowan saw it, and his expression shifted. "That's not... I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did." "Abigail, you're right. I have nothing. I came here with nothing, and if this doesn't work out, I'll leave with nothing. But while I'm here, I'm not going to pretend like what people say doesn't matter, because it does. It always has." She turned and walked toward the barn before he could respond. That night, she lay in her cot and stared at the ceiling, fighting back tears she refused to shed. She'd thought maybe, finally, she'd found somewhere she could just exist without being judged. But the judgment had followed her anyway, twisting everything into something ugly. The worst part was knowing Rowan was right. She had nothing. No leverage, no options, no way to fight back against whatever story the town wanted to tell about her. All she could do was keep working and hope that eventually the truth would matter more than the gossip. It was a stupid hope, but it was all she had. The whispers turned to confrontations. 2 weeks later, Abigail was in town again, this time with Rowan, who'd insisted on coming despite her protests. They were at the blacksmith's getting new horseshoes when Constance Miller approached with 2 other women Abigail didn't recognize. "Mr. Hale," Constance said, her voice syrupy sweet. "How good to see you, and Miss Monroe, of course." Rowan nodded curtly. "Mrs. Miller."
I've been meaning to speak with you both. Constance's smile didn't reach her eyes. There's been some concern in town about the arrangement you two have. What arrangement? Rowan's voice was flat. Well, a young unmarried woman living alone with a man, working in such close quarters. You must understand how it looks. It looks like an employer and an employee, Rowan said, because that's what it is. Of course, but appearances matter, don't they? And the appearance is rather compromising. Abigail felt her face burn. I have my own room, in the barn. There's nothing improper about it. One of the other women, thin, with a pinched face, laughed. Your own room in the barn? How respectable. More respectable than half the gossip that comes out of this town, Rowan snapped. Constance's expression hardened. Now, Mr. Hale, there's no need to be hostile. We're simply concerned for Miss Monroe's welfare. A girl her age, with no family, no protection. I don't need protection, Abigail interrupted. I need work, which Mr. Hale has given me. That's all there is to it. Is it? The pinched-faced woman leaned in. Or is there perhaps an understanding between you two? An arrangement of a different nature? The implication was clear. Rowan took a step forward, and the women actually backed up. Say that again, he said quietly. I dare you. The blacksmith, who'd been watching from his forge, called out, Rowan, not here! Rowan's hands were clenched into fists. Abigail touched his arm lightly. Let's go, she said softly. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't listen. Then he turned and walked away, his movements rigid with barely controlled rage. Abigail followed, feeling the weight of stairs on her back. They rode home in silence. Rowan's jaw was tight, his hands hard on the reins. When they reached the ranch, he dismounted and immediately started unhitching the wagon with sharp, angry movements. You didn't have to defend me, Abigail said. Yes, I did. It just makes things worse. Worse than what? Worse than people thinking I'm forcing you to stay here? Worse than them treating you like you're… He stopped, shaking his head. Like I'm what? Like you're selling yourself, he said bluntly. That's what they think. That you're staying here because I'm paying you for more than ranch work. The words hung between them, ugly and raw. Abigail felt something crack inside her chest. And that bothers you. Of course it bothers me. Why? Because it's not true, or because it might hurt your reputation? Rowan turned to face her fully. Because you don't deserve it. You work harder than anyone I've ever hired. You show up every damn day and do whatever I ask without complaining, and they're out there acting like you're… He made a frustrated sound. It's wrong. Wrong things happen all the time, Abigail said tiredly. I'm used to it. Well, you shouldn't have to be. She wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe that fairness mattered, that truth would win out eventually. But she'd learned better. I should get back to work, she said. Rowan caught her arm gently. Abigail, if you want to leave, if this is too much, I won't hold it against you. She looked at him. Really looked at him. At the way his jaw was still tight with anger, at the concern in his eyes that he was trying to hide. Do you want me to leave? She asked. No. Then I'm staying. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Or just exhaustion at fighting the same battle over and over. Rowan let go of her arm. All right, but if it gets worse… It won't, Abigail lied. It got worse. The town council got involved 3 weeks later. Abigail was mending fence in the north pasture when she saw the wagon approaching. 3 men in dark suits looking wildly out of place against the grassland. She straightened, her stomach dropping. Rowan appeared from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He watched the wagon approach with an expression that could have been carved from stone. The men climbed down. Abigail recognized one of them, Mayor Hutchins, a portly man with thinning hair and an inflated sense of importance. Mr. Hale, Hutchins said, we need to speak with you. About what? About Miss Monroe. Hutchins glanced at Abigail, his expression disapproving. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Anything you have to say about her, you can say in front of her. Hutchins' mouth thinned. Very well. The council has received numerous complaints regarding your employment arrangement with this young woman. Given the impropriety of the situation, we're here to offer a solution. What situation? Rowan asked. I hired a ranch hand. She works. I pay her. Where's the impropriety?
One of the other men, a lawyer type with spectacles, spoke up. Mr. Hale, surely you understand how this appears. An unmarried woman living on your property without proper supervision or chaperonage, she works for me. That's not illegal. Perhaps not technically, Hutchins said, but morally it's questionable, and this town has standards. Standards, Rowan repeated flatly. Right. The same standards that let you all gossip and spread lies without a shred of proof? We're trying to help, Hutchins insisted. For Miss Monroe's sake. A woman in her position is vulnerable to all sorts of— I'm right here, Abigail said sharply, and I can speak for myself. The three men turned to look at her like they'd forgotten she existed. Miss Monroe, Hutchins said, his tone patronizing. We understand you may feel obligated to stay here. Perhaps Mr. Hale has made promises, or perhaps you fear what will happen if you leave. But I assure you the town will provide assistance. There are respectable positions available. I have a respectable position, Abigail interrupted. Right here. My dear girl, I'm not your dear anything, and I'm not leaving. The lawyer type adjusted his spectacles. Miss Monroe, if Mr. Hale has coerced you in any way, he hasn't. Then surely you can see the wisdom in finding employment elsewhere, somewhere more appropriate for a woman of your age and circumstances. More appropriate, Abigail repeated. You mean somewhere I'm under someone else's control, somewhere I can be watched and managed and kept in line. Hutchins had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's not what we're suggesting. Yes, it is. You want me gone because my being here embarrasses you, because you can't control the story people are telling, so you'd rather remove me entirely. Now see here. No. Abigail's voice was steady, even though her heart was racing. You see here. I work hard. I earn my wages honestly, and what I do with my life is none of your concern. Everything that happens in this town is our concern, the third man said. He was older, with a stern face and cold eyes. We maintain order. We protect decency. You protect your own comfort, Rowan said, and when something makes you uncomfortable, you try to make it go away. Hutchins drew himself up. Mr. Hale, we're trying to be reasonable. Then be reasonable somewhere else. Get off my property. We're acting in Miss Monroe's best interest. Miss Monroe has spoken for herself. Now I'm speaking. Get off my property. The three men exchanged looks. The lawyer type opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Very well, Hutchins said stiffly, but this isn't over. The town has a right to expect certain standards, and if those standards aren't met voluntarily, other measures may need to be taken. Is that a threat? It's a fact. They climbed back into their wagon and left, kicking up dust as they went. Abigail and Rowan stood in the yard watching them disappear. Other measures, Abigail said quietly. What does that mean? Nothing good. Rowan ran a hand through his hair. They can't force you to leave, not legally, but they can make things difficult. How? Refusing to do business with me, spreading more rumors, maybe even bringing in a judge, claiming you're being held against your will. That's insane. That's politics. He looked at her. You sure you want to stay? This is only going to get uglier. Abigail thought about the boarding house, about Mrs. Cranshaw's satisfied smile when she'd sent her away, about years of being invisible, disposable, less than nothing. I'm sure, she said. Rowan nodded slowly. All right, then we deal with it. How? Same way we've been dealing with it. We work, we ignore them, and we don't give them the satisfaction of seeing us break. It sounded simple. It sounded impossible. Abigail went back to mending fence, but her hands shook as she worked. That night, neither of them could eat much dinner. They sat on the porch in heavy silence, both lost in their own thoughts. I'm sorry, Rowan said eventually. Abigail looked at him. For what? For dragging you into this. If I'd known it would turn into— He gestured vaguely. All of this. I would have warned you. Would you have not hired me? He considered that. No, probably not. Then don't apologize. You gave me a chance when no one else would. That's worth something. Is it? If it costs you your reputation? I didn't have a reputation to begin with, Abigail said. I was nobody. At least here, I'm somebody. even if that somebody is just the girl who works for Rowan Hale. You're more than that. The word surprised her. She looked at him, but he was staring out at the hills, his expression unreadable.
What am I then? She asked softly. Rowan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, someone who doesn't quit. Someone who shows up every day and does what needs doing, no matter how hard it gets. Someone worth defending. Abigail's throat felt tight. You barely know me. I know enough. They sat in silence after that, but it felt different, less heavy. Like maybe they were in this together, whatever this was. The town made good on its threats.
Over the next 2 weeks, Rowan was refused service at the feed store, the blacksmith, and the general store. Abigail tried going instead, but the results were the same. Cold stares, refusals, doors closing in her face. They had to ride to the next town over, adding hours to every supply run. The ranch work didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. A section of fence went down in a storm, and it took 3 days of brutal labor to repair. 2 of the cattle got sick, requiring constant monitoring. The well pump broke, meaning water had to be hauled from the creek until Rowan could fix it. Abigail worked until she couldn't see straight, until every muscle screamed. But she didn't complain, didn't slow down. Rowan noticed. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, he poured her a glass of whiskey without asking and handed it to her. Drink, he said. Abigail took it, too tired to argue. The whiskey burned going down, but it warmed her from the inside. You're tougher than you look, Rowan said. I have to be. No, I mean it. Most people would have quit by now. Hell, most men would have quit. Most men have other options.
Do they? He took a drink from his own glass. I grew up here. This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. And you know what? I've never felt like I had options either. Abigail looked at him. It was the most personal thing he'd ever said to her. Why not? She asked. Because this place comes with expectations, with a reputation. My grandfather was a bastard. My father was worse. Everyone in town assumes I'm just like them, mean, violent, someone to be afraid of. Are you? Sometimes, he admitted, when I need to be, but not without reason. What happened with the cattle thieves? The question came out before she could stop it. Patterson said you beat one of them badly. Rowan's jaw tightened. They stole 50 head of cattle over 6 months. I caught them red-handed, loading my livestock onto their wagon in the middle of the night. I gave them a choice, leave and never come back, or I call the sheriff and they hang for it. And one of them drew a knife, so I put him down. He looked at her. I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't regret it either. Those cattle represented 6 months of work, 6 months of feed and care and investment. I wasn't going to let someone take that from me. Abigail nodded slowly. It made sense. It was harsh, maybe, but it made sense. What about Martha Cowan? She asked. Rowan's expression went carefully blank. What about her? What really happened? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, She came here thinking ranch work meant light chores and flirting with the boss. When I made it clear that wasn't happening, she got angry. Started making mistakes on purpose, showing up late, refusing to follow instructions. I gave her 2 warnings. On the 3rd day, I told her it wasn't working out, and she needed to leave. That's it? That's it. She left cursing my name and telling anyone who'd listen that I'd tried to force myself on her. His voice was bitter. Easier to believe I'm a monster than to admit she couldn't handle honest work. Abigail believed him. She'd worked alongside Rowan for months now. She'd seen his anger, his impatience, his high standards, but she'd never seen him be cruel without cause. Never seen him use his strength to intimidate or harm. I believe you, she said. Rowan looked at her like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. You do? Yes. Why? Because if you were the kind of man Martha Cowan claims, I wouldn't still be here. Something shifted in his face. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Thank you, he said quietly. They finished their drinks in comfortable silence. Later, lying in her cot, Abigail thought about what Rowan had said, about not having options, about living up to expectations that weren't fair. Maybe they were more alike than she'd realized. The judge came on a Tuesday. Abigail was in the vegetable garden, a small plot Rowan had helped her start a month ago, when she heard the wagon.
She straightened, dirt on her hands, and saw a well-dressed man climbing down with 2 deputies flanking him. Rowan emerged from the barn, his expression going hard when he saw them. "Judge Morrison," he said flatly, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Morrison was an older man, gray-haired and distinguished-looking. His voice carried authority. "Mr. Hale, I'm here on official business regarding Miss Abigail Monroe." "What business?" "The town council has filed a petition expressing concern for Miss Monroe's welfare. They claim she may be living here under duress." "That's a lie," Abigail said, stepping forward. Morrison looked at her. "Miss Monroe, I'll need to speak with you privately. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Mr. Hale." "I'm afraid that's not appropriate. If you're being coerced, I'm not." "Nevertheless, I must insist." Morrison nodded to the deputies. "Gentlemen, if you would escort Miss Monroe to the house." "Like hell," Rowan said, moving to block them. One of the deputies, a young man with nervous eyes, put his hand on his gun. "Mr. Hale, don't make this difficult." "I'm not making it difficult, you are. By coming onto my land and threatening my employee." "We're not threatening anyone," Morrison said calmly. "We're conducting an investigation. If Miss Monroe is here of her own free will, she has nothing to fear from answering a few questions." Abigail met Rowan's eyes. She could see the fury there, barely contained. But she also saw the calculation. Biting the law would only make things worse. "It's all right," she said quietly. "Abigail." "It's all right. I'll talk to them." Rowan's jaw clenched, but he stepped aside. Morrison led her into the house, Rowan's house, which she'd never actually been inside before. It was sparse but clean, with simple furniture and nothing decorative except a faded photograph on the mantel. "Please sit," Morrison said, gesturing to a chair. Abigail sat, folding her dirt-stained hands in her lap. Morrison sat across from her, his expression grave. "Miss Monroe, I want you to understand that you're not in trouble. We're simply concerned for your welfare." "I appreciate the concern, but it's not necessary." "Let me be direct. Are you living here voluntarily?" "Yes." "Has Mr. Hale ever threatened you, physically harmed you, prevented you from leaving?" "No, never." "Has he made any inappropriate advances?" Abigail felt her face heat. "No." Morrison studied her. "You understand that if he has, you can tell me. You'll be protected." "There's nothing to protect me from. Mr. Hale is my employer, that's all. An employer who provides you with lodging in his barn. A room, a private room, without proper chaperonage. I don't need a chaperone. I need a job, which he's given me." Morrison leaned back. "Miss Monroe, you're a young woman alone in the world. It's only natural that the community would be concerned about your living situation." "The community wasn't concerned when I was starving at Mrs. Cranshaw's boarding house," Abigail said sharply. "They weren't concerned when I had nowhere to go and no way to support myself. They're only concerned now because my being here makes them uncomfortable. Can you blame them? The appearance of impropriety is just an appearance, not reality. Appearances matter. To who? To people who want to feel morally superior by judging situations they know nothing about." Morrison's expression hardened slightly. "I understand you're defensive, but I'm not defensive. I'm tired. Tired of defending myself for working hard and trying to survive. Tired of people assuming the worst about me just because I'm not living the life they think I should live. No one is judging you. Everyone is judging me. You're judging me right now, sitting there assuming Mr. Hale must be taking advantage of me because you can't imagine any other reason I'd stay." "Then tell me," Morrison said. "Why do you stay?" "Really?" Abigail met his eyes. "Because for the first time in my life, someone treats me like I'm capable, like I'm worth something more than being invisible. Mr. Hale doesn't coddle me or pity me. He gives me work to do and expects me to do it well. And when I do, he pays me fairly. That's more respect than I've gotten anywhere else." Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And if I told you that staying here could damage your reputation permanently? That no respectable family in town will hire you? No decent man will court you? Then I guess I'll have to build a life that doesn't require their approval." The judge studied her for a long moment. Then he stood. "Very well. I'll report back to the council that you appear to be here voluntarily. But Miss Monroe, I strongly encourage you to reconsider your position. This situation can't continue indefinitely without consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Morrison's expression was grave. the kind that forced difficult choices. He left her sitting there, her heart pounding. Outside, she heard raised voices, Rowan arguing with the judge. She couldn't make out the words, but the anger in Rowan's tone was clear. Then the wagon pulled away, and silence fell over the ranch again. Abigail found Rowan in the barn, pacing like a caged animal. "What did he say to you?" he demanded when he saw her. "That I should leave, for my own good." And I told him I'm staying. Rowan stopped pacing. "They're not going to let this go, Abigail. Morrison as good as told me they're preparing to take legal action." "What kind of legal action?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, it won't be good for either of us." Abigail felt something cold settle in her stomach. "So what do we do?" "You should leave," Rowan said bluntly, "before this gets worse." "I don't want to leave. What you want doesn't matter if they force you out anyway." "They can't." "They can," Rowan interrupted. "They can claim you're being held against your will. They can declare you unfit to make your own decisions. They can assign you a guardian who will ship you off to wherever they think is best. And I won't be able to stop them." The words hit like physical blows. "That's not fair." "No, it's not." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something like defeat in his eyes. "But it's how things work. The town makes the rules, and people like us, we don't get to break them without paying for it." Abigail felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "So that's it? We just give up? What else can we do?" She didn't have an answer. Even must. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her cot, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything she'd built here. The calluses on her hands, the strength in her back, the pride of earning her own wages, all of it threatened by people who couldn't stand the idea of her choosing her own path. Somewhere around midnight, she heard footsteps outside, then a knock on her door. "Abigail?" Rowan's voice, quiet. She got up, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, and opened the door. He stood there in his moonlight, looking exhausted. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About what Morrison said. About consequences and difficult choices." Abigail's stomach tightened. "And?" "There might be a way to end this, to make it so they can't force you out." "How?" Rowan met her eyes. "We get married." The words hung between them in the darkness, absurd and impossible, and somehow the only thing that made sense. Abigail stared at him. "What?" "You heard me." Rowan's voice was steady, but his hands were shoved deep in his pockets like he didn't trust what they'd do otherwise. "We get married, legally. Then they can't touch you. You'd be my wife, living on my property by right. Morrison and his council can go to hell." "That's..." Abigail's mind was spinning. "That's insane." "Is it? More insane than letting them drag you away? More insane than giving up everything you've built here because some busybodies can't mind their own business? We barely know each other. I know you show up every morning and work until your hands bleed. I know you don't quit when things get hard. I know you're the only person I've hired in 5 years who's worth a damn." He paused. "What else do I need to know?" Abigail's throat felt tight. "Marriage isn't... It's not just a business arrangement." "Why not? People marry for all kinds of reasons. Money, land, family obligations. At least we'd be honest about it." "Honest about what exactly?" Rowan met her eyes. "About the fact that we both need this. You need protection from the town. I need help running this ranch. We work well together. Why not make it official?" "Because it's..." She stopped, trying to find the right words. "Because people will think we're doing it to prove them right, that there was something improper going on all along." "Let them think what they want. At least you won't be forced out." Abigail turned away, her mind racing. Marriage, to Rowan Hale. The man everyone feared. The man she'd spent 3 months working beside, learning to read his moods, his silences, his rare moments of something that might have been approval. It was crazy. It might also be the only way. "I need time to think," she said. "We don't have time. Morrison's going to come back with papers, maybe as soon as next week. Once they start legal proceedings, it's over. You're asking me to make a decision that'll affect the rest of my life." "I know." His voice softened slightly. "I'm not asking lightly, but I'm also not going to stand by and watch them take you away just because they can." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Why do you care what happens to me?"
Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because you're the first person in years who's looked at me and seen something other than my father's son. You work for me because I gave you a job, not because you're afraid of me. And I—" He stopped, shook his head. "I don't want to lose that." Abigail felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't love. She wasn't naive enough to call it that. But it was something. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. "If we did this," she said slowly, "what would it look like? Would we—" She felt her face heat. "Would you expect—" "No." Rowan's answer was immediate. "Your room stays your room. Nothing changes except the legal arrangement. We work together during the day. We live separately otherwise, like we have been. And if one of us wants out eventually, then we figure it out. But right now we need to survive what's coming. Everything else can wait." Abigail looked at him standing there in the moonlight, this man who'd given her work when no one else would, who'd defended her to the town even when it cost him business, who was now offering her the protection of his name. It was practical. Cold, maybe, but practical. And she was so tired of fighting alone. "All right," she said quietly. Rowan's expression shifted. "All right? Yes, we'll do it." He let out a breath she hadn't realized he'd been holding. "We'll need to move fast, get the license, find someone to perform the ceremony before Morrison comes back. The Reverend won't do it, not after everything that's happened. There's a circuit judge who passes through Millbrook, about 30 miles north. He can marry us without asking too many questions." "When?" "Day after tomorrow. We'll ride out at dawn, be back by evening." 2 days. Abigail felt dizzy. What do we tell people? The truth. That we're getting married. Let them make of it what they will. They'll say terrible things. They're already saying terrible things. Rowan stepped closer. "Abigail, if you're having second thoughts—" "I'm not." She wasn't sure that was true, but she said it anyway. This is happening very fast." "I know, but fast is all we've got." They stood there in the darkness, two people about to tie their lives together out of desperation and defiance, and something neither of them could quite name. "Get some sleep," Rowan said finally. "We've got a lot to do before we leave." He turned to go, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I'll try to be a decent husband, in whatever way that means for us. I'll try to be a decent wife." The words felt strange in her mouth. Wife. She was going to be someone's wife. Rowan nodded and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Abigail went back inside her room and sat on the cot, her hands shaking. What had she just agreed to? The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Rowan rode into town, not Cedar Ridge, but the next town over, and came back with a simple dress he'd bought from a seamstress. Navy blue, practical, better quality than anything Abigail had owned in years. "For tomorrow," he said, handing it to her, "if you want it." Abigail held the dress, feeling the weight of the fabric. He'd thought about this, actually planned for it. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me yet. You might regret this by next week." "Will you?" Rowan considered the question. "No, I don't think so." That night, Abigail tried the dress on alone in her room. It fit well enough, a little loose in the waist, a little tight in the shoulders, but nothing terrible. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror Rowan had brought her months ago. A different person stared back. Tanned from sun, muscles visible in her arms, eyes harder than they'd been when she arrived. Tomorrow she'd be married. The thought still didn't feel real. She lay awake most of the night, alternating between certainty and panic. This was the right choice. This was insane. This would protect her. This would trap her. By the time dawn came, she was exhausted and wired at the same time. Rowan was already up, preparing the wagon. He dressed better than usual, still work clothes, but clean, his hair actually combed. "Ready?" he asked when she approached. Abigail clutched the small bag she'd packed with the dress and her mother's photograph. "As I'll ever be." The ride to Millbrook took 4 hours. They spoke little, both lost in their own thoughts. The landscape changed as they traveled north. More trees, rolling hills, streams cutting through valleys. It was beautiful country, and under different circumstances, Abigail might have enjoyed the journey. Instead, she felt like she was riding toward something inevitable and terrifying. Millbrook was smaller than Cedar Ridge, barely more than a main street with a handful of buildings.
Rowan pulled the wagon up to what looked like a courthouse. "Wait here," he said. "I'll find the judge." Abigail sat in the wagon, watching people pass by. A woman with 2 children, an old man leading a tired-looking horse. None of them paid her any attention. She was about to become a married woman, and no one here even knew her name. Rowan returned 15 minutes later with a weathered-looking man in a black coat. "This is Judge Carver. He's agreed to perform the ceremony." Carver looked at them both with shrewd eyes. "You two seem in a hurry." "We are," Rowan said flatly. "Any reason I should know about?" "We need to be married today. That's all you need to know," Carver grunted. "Fair enough. Not my business anyway. You got the license?" Rowan produced papers from his coat. Carver glanced at them, nodded. "All right then. Miss, you might want to change into something nicer if you brought it." Abigail had forgotten she was still in her work dress, dusty from the road. "Right, yes." There was a small room in the back of the courthouse where she changed quickly, her fingers fumbling with buttons. The navy dress felt strange after months of wearing the same 2 faded things. When she came back out, Rowan's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or something else she couldn't read. "You look—" He stopped. "Good. You look good." "Thank you." Carver led them to a small room with a desk and a few chairs. "We'll need witnesses. I can pull in my clerk and the sheriff if that works." 2 strangers appeared, a young man with ink-stained fingers and an older man with a badge. They looked bored, like they did this sort of thing regularly. Carver opened a worn book and began reading in a monotone. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here." The words washed over Abigail. She'd imagined getting married someday, back when she was younger, before her mother died, when the future still seemed like it might hold something good. She'd pictured a church full of people, flowers, a white dress. This was nothing like that. This was a dusty courthouse room with 2 strangers as witnesses and a judge who was clearly in a hurry to get to his next appointment. But when Carver got to the vows, Rowan's voice was steady. "I, Rowan Hale, take you, Abigail Monroe, to be my lawfully wedded wife." Then it was her turn. "I, Abigail Monroe, take you, Rowan Hale, to be my lawfully wedded husband." The words felt huge in her mouth. Permanent. "Do you have rings?" Carver asked. Rowan reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 simple gold bands. He must have bought them in town yesterday. He slid one onto Abigail's finger. It was slightly too big, but it stayed. She took the other ring with shaking hands and slid it onto his. It fit perfectly. "By the power vested in me by the territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Rowan looked at her. Abigail looked back. Neither of them moved. Carver cleared his throat. "It's customary. We'll skip that part," Rowan said. Carver shrugged. "Suit yourselves. Sign here." They signed the marriage certificate. The clerk and sheriff signed as witnesses. Carver stamped it official and handed Rowan a copy. "Congratulations," he said, sounding like he didn't particularly care one way or the other. And just like that, it was done. They were married. The ride back to the ranch was even quieter than the ride there. Abigail kept looking at the ring on her finger, still not quite believing it was real. She was married to Rowan Hale. Mrs. Abigail Hale. The name felt foreign in her mind. "You all right?" Rowan asked eventually. "I don't know," Abigail admitted. "Are you?" "I don't know either." At least they were honest about it. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Rowan helped her down from the wagon, an automatic gesture, but it felt different now, more significant. "I'll take care of the horses," he said. "You should rest." "I'm not tired." "Still, it's been a long day." Abigail nodded and went to her room. Her room, still, not their room, and changed back into her work clothes. The navy dress she hung carefully on a nail in the wall, her wedding dress. She sat on the cot and stared at the ring on her finger. What had they done? A knock on the door made her jump. "Come in," she called. Rowan stood in the doorway, still in his better clothes. "I was thinking we should probably tell people, before they hear it some other way." "Tell them how?" "Ride into town tomorrow. Make it official." Abigail's stomach clenched. "They're going to be furious." "Probably. But there's nothing they can do about it now. We're legally married. Morrison and his counsel can choke on it." There was satisfaction in his voice. This wasn't just about protecting her. It was about winning, about showing the town they couldn't control him. "What if they don't believe us?" Abigail asked. "We have the certificate, signed and stamped. They'll believe us. What if they make things worse?" "How much worse can it get?" Rowan leaned against the door frame. "They were already trying to run you out. Now at least you're protected." "Am I?" "Yes." He said it with certainty. "You're my wife now. That means something, whether they like it or not." Wife. There was that word again. "Rowan," Abigail said slowly, "what if this doesn't work? What if being married just makes them angrier?" "Then they're angry, but you're still here." She wanted to believe that, wanted to believe this desperate gamble would actually change something. "Get some sleep," Rowan said. "We'll face them tomorrow." After he left, Abigail lay down but didn't sleep. She kept turning the ring around her finger, feeling its weight. She was married, she was protected, she was terrified. Morning came too fast. They rode into Cedar Ridge just after noon, when the main street would be busiest. Rowan wanted an audience. Abigail sat beside him in the wagon, her spine straight, trying to look braver than she felt. People noticed them immediately. Whispers started before they even reached the general store. Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the town hall, where Judge Morrison had his office. "Wait here," he told Abigail. "I'm coming with you." "Abigail, sir, I'm coming with you," she repeated firmly. "We're doing this together." Something that might have been pride flickered across Rowan's face. "All right." They walked into the town hall side by side. The clerk at the front desk looked up and his eyes went wide. "We need to see Judge Morrison," Rowan said. He's in a meeting." Then unmeeting him. "This won't take long." The clerk scurried off. Moments later, Morrison emerged from his office, his expression already irritated. "Mr. Hale, I told you—" He stopped when he saw Abigail. "Miss Monroe, what's this about?" "It's Mrs. Hale now, actually," Rowan said, pulling the marriage certificate from his coat. "We were married yesterday in Millbrook, Judge Carver presiding, all legal and proper." He handed Morrison the certificate. The judge stared at it like it was a snake. You got married. That's what the paper says." Morrison's face was turning red. You can't what? Can't get married? I checked the law. There's nothing preventing it." "You did this to circumvent," Morrison sputtered. "I did this because I wanted to marry my wife," Rowan said flatly. "Now she lives on my property by legal right as my spouse. Your concern for her welfare is no longer necessary." "This is a mockery. This is a marriage, legally binding, unless you're suggesting there's something improper about a man marrying a woman he's been courting." Morrison's mouth opened and closed. They both knew the trap. If he claimed the marriage was improper, he was admitting there was nothing wrong with their previous arrangement. If he accepted the marriage as legitimate, he had no grounds to interfere. "The council will hear about this," Morrison said finally. "I'm sure they will. We'll be at the ranch if anyone wants to congratulate us." Rowan took Abigail's arm and steered her toward the door. Behind them, Morrison's voice rose. "This isn't over, Hale." "Yeah," Rowan muttered. "It really is." They made it to the wagon before the crowd gathered. It seemed like half the town had materialized on the street, drawn by the commotion. Abigail saw Mrs. Cranshaw in the front, her face twisted with rage. Constance Miller beside her, whispering furiously to anyone who'd listen. "Is it true?" someone called out. "You married her?" "It's true," Rowan said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Abigail is my wife. We were married legally yesterday." The crowd erupted. "Shameful! You should be ashamed. Forced her into it, more like." "No one forced anyone," Abigail said, finding her voice. "I married him willingly." Mrs. Cranshaw pushed forward. "You stupid girl, you've ruined yourself. Absolutely ruined yourself." "I've saved myself," Abigail shot back, "from people like you who wanted to control what I did with my life." "You think this makes you respectable? You think anyone will forget what you were doing out there before you had a ring on your finger?" "I was working, earning honest wages. That's more than can be said for some people's gossip." The crowd was getting louder, angrier. Men were starting to push forward. "We should go," Rowan said quietly. But before they could climb into the wagon, someone grabbed Abigail's arm. It was Beatrice Yates from the boarding house, her soft face crumpled with what might have been genuine concern. Abigail, listen to me. If he forced you, if you need help, I don't need help, Abigail said, pulling her arm free. I made my choice. You don't understand what you've done. I understand perfectly. I chose my own path instead of letting all of you choose it for me. You chose wrong, Beatrice whispered. Abigail looked at her, at this woman who'd watched her scrub floors and go hungry and never once offered real help. Maybe, but at least it was my choice to make. Rowan was in the wagon now, offering his hand. Abigail took it and climbed up beside him. The crowd was shouting now, a wall of anger and judgment. Get out of here! Don't come back! You're not welcome in this town! Rowan snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward. People had to jump aside to avoid being run over. They rode through the hostile crowd in silence, Abigail's heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Once they were clear of town, on the open road, Rowan finally spoke. You all right? Abigail realized she was shaking. I know. They hate us. They hated us before, at least now it's honest. Abigail looked back toward town, already disappearing in the distance. There's no going back now, is there? No, Rowan said quietly. There's not. She turned to face forward, toward the ranch, toward whatever came next. Good, she said, surprising herself. I didn't want to go back anyway. The next few days were strange. They fell back into their work routine, feeding animals, mending fences, all the endless tasks the ranch demanded. But everything felt different now. Abigail was a married woman, a wife. And yet nothing between her and Rowan had really changed. They worked together during the day. They ate meals on the porch in the evening. They slept in separate rooms. It was exactly what they'd agreed to. So why did it feel wrong? On the fourth night after the wedding, Abigail found herself unable to sleep. She kept thinking about the crowd in town, the hatred in their faces. She got up and walked outside, needing air. Rowan was on the porch, sitting on the steps like he often did. He looked up when she approached. Can't sleep either? He asked. No. She sat down beside him. Keep thinking about what happened. They'll get over it eventually, or they won't. Either way, we'll manage. You sound very certain. I am certain. We survived everything they threw at us before. We'll survive this too. Abigail looked at him in the moonlight. Why did you really marry me, Rowan? He was quiet for a long moment. I told you why. You told me the practical reasons, but there has to be more than that. You could have just let me go, sent me to another town, given me money to start over. Why tie yourself to me legally? Rowan stared out at the dark hills. You remember what I said about not having options? About living up to expectations I never chose? Yes. Marrying you was the first time in years I did something just because I wanted to. Not because it made sense for the ranch, not because it's what my father would have done, not because of reputation or duty or any of that. He looked at her. I married you because when I thought about them taking you away, I couldn't stand it, and that was reason enough. Abigail felt something warm unfold in her chest. I thought this was just practical. Maybe it started that way, but somewhere along the line it became more than that. At least for me. He paused. What about you? Why did you say yes? Because you're the first person who ever made me feel like I mattered, Abigail said quietly. Not as someone to use or pity or control, just as myself. And I didn't want to lose that either. They sat in silence, letting the truth settle between them. So what now? Abigail asked. Now we figure out how to actually be married, whatever that looks like for us. I don't know what that looks like. Neither do I. But we'll figure it out. He stood, offering his hand. Come on. You should try to get some sleep. Abigail took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, but she didn't let go right away. Rowan? Yeah? Thank you for fighting for me. His hand tightened on hers. Thank you for staying. They stood there for a moment, connected by more than just a ring and a certificate now. Then Abigail went back to her room, but for the first time since the wedding, she didn't feel quite so alone. 2 weeks after they returned from Millbrook, the real consequences began. A wagon appeared on the road to the ranch, not coming to visit, but stopping at the property line. A man Abigail didn't recognize got out and hammered a sign into the ground. By the time Rowan reached him, the man was already climbing back into his wagon. What the hell is this? Rowan demanded. Official notice from the town council, the man said. You've been banned from conducting business within Cedar Ridge town limits. That includes buying, selling, or trading goods or services. On what grounds? Moral turpitude. Council voted yesterday. It's legal. The man snapped his reins and left before Rowan could respond. Abigail walked up beside him and read the sign. The language was formal and cold, but the message was clear. They were being cut off. They can't do this, she said. They just did. Rowan ripped the sign out of the ground and threw it aside. We'll have to go to other towns for supplies. Millbrook, maybe, or further. That'll take days every time we need something. I know. Abigail felt anger rising. This is because we got married. They're punishing us. Yes. How is that legal? Because they make the rules. Rowan's jaw was tight, and they've decided we broke them. That night they sat on the porch and made lists of what they'd need, how far they'd have to travel, how to make it work. It felt impossible. But as Rowan had said, they'd figure it out. They always did. The isolation the town imposed became their new reality, but strangely, it didn't break them. It forged them. Within a month, they'd established new supply routes. Millbrook became their primary source for goods, though it meant a full day's journey each way. Rowan also found a feed supplier 2 towns over who didn't care about Cedar Ridge politics and was willing to deliver for an extra fee. It was more expensive, more time-consuming, but it worked. What surprised Abigail was how the isolation changed things between them. With no town to visit, no people to interact with, they only had each other. The silence that had defined their early months together gradually filled with conversation. It started small. Rowan explaining the history of the ranch over dinner. Abigail talking about her mother, about the years before everything fell apart. Neither of them overshared, but the walls between them started coming down in slow increments. One evening, about 6 weeks after the wedding, Abigail was preparing dinner when Rowan came in from the barn looking frustrated. Problem? She asked. The south fence is worse than I thought. Whole section needs replacing, not just patching. How long will that take? A week. Maybe more. He sat down heavily at the table. And I can't do it alone. Not and keep up with everything else. Abigail set down the knife she'd been using to cut vegetables. Then I'll help. It's heavy work, different from what you've been doing. So teach me. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, we start tomorrow. The fence work was brutal. They spent 10 hours a day digging post holes, stretching wire, hammering until Abigail's arms felt like they'd fall off. But they worked in rhythm now, anticipating each other's movements, communicating with gestures and half sentences. On the 4th day, the wire snapped while Rowan was tensioning it. The recoil caught him across the face, opening a gash along his jaw. Damn it, he hissed, pressing his hand to the wound. Abigail dropped her tools and ran to him. Let me see. I'm fine. You're bleeding everywhere. Let me see. Reluctantly, he moved his hand. The cut was deep, still welling blood. We need to clean this, Abigail said. Come on. She led him back to the house. His house, which she'd still only been inside a handful of times. The main room was sparse but lived in. A worn sofa, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with books she hadn't known he owned. Sit, she ordered, pointing to one of the chairs. Rowan sat. Abigail found clean cloths and water, brought them over, and began carefully cleaning the wound. He winced, but didn't pull away. This might need stitches, she said. It'll heal. It'll scar worse if you don't let me stitch it. You know how to do that? My mother taught me. She used to patch up my father after his fights. Abigail paused. Do you have a needle and thread? Rowan directed her to a cabinet. She found what she needed and returned to him. This is going to hurt, she warned. I've had worse. She threaded the needle with steady hands, positioned herself close to him, and began stitching. Rowan's jaw tightened with each pull of the thread, but he stayed still. Abigail focused on the work, trying not to think about how close they were. Close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him, could see the way his eyes tracked her movements. There, she said finally, tying off the last stitch. Done. Thank you. She started to step back, but Rowan caught her wrist gently. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did. You're my husband. The word still felt strange, but less foreign than before. A husband who keeps you sleeping in the barn. A husband who gave me a choice about where to sleep. There's a difference. Rowan's thumb brushed against the inside of her wrist, probably without him even realizing it. Is there something you want to change about our arrangement? Abigail's heart was beating too fast. I don't know. Is there something you want to change? I don't want you to feel obligated to anything. That was part of our agreement. I know. But we're not the same people who made that agreement anymore. The air between them felt charged. Rowan was still holding her wrist, his grip light but present. What are you saying? He asked quietly. I'm saying, Abigail took a breath. I'm saying maybe we could start having dinner in here instead of on the porch. Maybe I could see some of those books you have. Maybe we could talk more, like we've been doing. Rowan's expression softened. I'd like that. Just talking, Abigail clarified. I don't know if I'm ready for... I know. And that's fine. We move at whatever pace you're comfortable with. She nodded, relieved and somehow disappointed at the same time. That night, they ate dinner at Rowan's table. He showed her his collection of books, mostly agricultural texts, but some novels, some poetry. They talked about what they'd read, what they thought about it. It was the most normal evening Abigail had experienced in years. When she went back to her room in the barn, she lay awake thinking about the feel of Rowan's hand on her wrist, the careful way he'd looked at her while she stitched his wound. Something was changing between them, slowly but undeniably. The first frost came in October, earlier than expected. Abigail woke to find ice crystals on her window and her breath fogging in the cold air. She dressed quickly, layering everything she owned, and went outside to find Rowan already working to protect the vegetable garden. We need to harvest what we can today, he said. Anything left will be dead by morning. They spent the day pulling vegetables, storing them in the root cellar Rowan had shown her weeks ago. The work was cold and muddy and exhausting. By evening, Abigail was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. You're freezing, Rowan said when he saw her. I'm fine. You're blue. Come on. He led her into the house and started building up the fire in the stone hearth. Within minutes, heat began filling the room. Sit here, he said, positioning her close to the flames. I'll make coffee. Abigail sat, holding her hands out toward the warmth. She heard Rowan moving around the kitchen, heard the sound of water being poured, the clink of mugs. When he came back, he handed her a cup and sat beside her. They drank in silence, watching the fire. It's going to get colder, Rowan said eventually. A lot colder. That room in the barn, it's not insulated well enough for winter. Abigail's stomach tightened. I'll manage. You'll freeze, and I'm not going to let that happen. What are you suggesting? Rowan was quiet for a moment. There's a second bedroom upstairs. It's small, but it has a stove. You'd be warmer. In your house? Yes. Abigail stared into the fire. Moving into the house felt like crossing a line, even if it was practical, even if it made sense. People will, she started. People already think the worst of us. At least this way, you won't die of cold to spare their delicate sensibilities. He had a point. The second bedroom, Abigail said, still separate. Still separate, Rowan confirmed, unless and until you decide otherwise. Abigail nodded slowly. All right, I'll move my things tomorrow. The next morning, Rowan helped her carry her few possessions from the barn to the upstairs bedroom. It was small, like he'd said, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small iron stove. But it was warm, and it had a real window with glass, not just shutters. There's extra blankets in the chest, Rowan said from the doorway. And if you need anything, He pointed down the hall. Thank you. He nodded and left her to settle in. Abigail sat on the bed, looking around at what was now her space. It felt strange being inside the house, hearing Rowan moving around downstairs, knowing he was just down the hall at night. But it also felt right in a way she hadn't expected. Living under the same roof changed the rhythm of their days. They saw each other more often, passing in the hall in the morning, sharing the kitchen while preparing meals, sitting by the fire in the evening. The proximity could have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. They'd learned how to exist together during their months of working side by side. This was just an extension of that. One night, about 2 weeks after she'd moved in, Abigail came downstairs to find Rowan asleep in his chair by the fire, a book fallen open on his lap. She should have woken him, send him to bed. Instead, she found a blanket and draped it over him carefully. He stirred slightly but didn't wake. Abigail stood there for a moment looking at him. His face was softer in sleep, the hard edges that defined his waking hours smoothed away. The scar she'd stitched was healing well, a thin line across his jaw that would probably fade with time. She went back upstairs, but she couldn't stop thinking about the unexpected tenderness of covering him with a blanket, the domesticity of the gesture. They were building something. She could feel it forming between them like ice crystallizing on glass, slow, delicate, but undeniably there. November brought the first snow, and with it, another challenge. Rowan came back from checking the northern pasture looking grim. "Cattle are getting through the fence up there," he said. "Something's broken or been pushed down. If we don't fix it fast, we'll lose half the herd." "How bad is the damage?" "Bad enough that it'll take both of us several days to repair, and we need to do it before the next storm hits." They rode out the next morning, bringing tools and supplies. The damage was worse than Rowan had described. 20 feet of fence completely down, posts snapped, wire tangled and useless. "Someone did this deliberately," Rowan said, examining the breaks. "These posts were cut." Abigail felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "Who would fit? Who do you think? Someone from town who wants to cost me money? Maybe thinks if things get bad enough out here, we'll give up and leave." That's sabotage. That's revenge." Rowan's expression was hard. "They can't touch us legally now, so they're finding other ways." They worked for 3 days in brutal cold, replacing posts and restringing wire. Abigail's hands were raw despite gloves, her face windburned and chapped. On the second night, camping in a makeshift shelter near the work site because it was too far to ride back daily, Rowan asked, "Do you ever regret it, marrying me?" Abigail looked up from the small fire they'd built. "Why would you ask that?" "Because this—" He gestured at their surroundings, at the broken fence, at the isolation they lived in. "Isn't what most people want from marriage. It's hard work and people actively trying to make our lives difficult. I wouldn't blame you if you wanted out." "Do you want out?" "No, but I'm used to this. You're not." Abigail considered her answer carefully. "I won't lie and say this is easy. It's not. But I've spent my whole life taking the easy path other people chose for me, and it got me nothing but misery. This is hard, but it's mine. I chose it. And no, I don't regret that." "Even when some bastard cuts our fence to hurt us?" "Even then, because whoever did it, they're hoping we'll break, and I'm tired of breaking for other people." Rowan smiled, a real smile, rare and genuine. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" "I suppose we are." That night, sleeping in bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, Abigail felt something settle in her chest. This was her life now. Hard and isolated and constantly under siege from people who wanted to see them fail. But it was hers, and she'd fight to keep it. They finished the fence and returned home to find another problem waiting. The well was running dry. "Damn it," Rowan muttered, staring at the pump producing only a trickle. "I was afraid of this. We need to dig deeper or find a new water source." "How long will that take?" "Weeks. Maybe longer." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "We can haul water from the creek for now, but that's not sustainable long term." "Then we dig." "Abigail, I can't ask you to— You're not asking. I'm offering. We need water. We'll dig for it." They started the next day, working in shifts because the physical toll was too much to sustain continuously. Rowan did most of the heavy digging while Abigail hauled dirt and brought water and tools. It was punishing work. They made progress measured in inches. 2 weeks in, Abigail's hands were so blistered and torn that she couldn't grip the shovel anymore without wrapping them in cloth. Rowan's back was seizing up from the repetitive motion. "Maybe we should hire help," Abigail suggested one evening as she wrapped his back with hot compresses. "With what money? And who would come work for us anyway? We're pariahs." "There has to be someone." But there wasn't. Every inquiry Rowan made was met with refusal or outright hostility. They were on their own. The water finally came in December, just as the coldest weather hit. Rowan's shovel broke through into an underground spring, and cold, clear water flooded the hole they'd spent a month digging. They stood there in the freezing air, covered in mud, watching water pool at their feet. Then Abigail started laughing. Rowan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "What's funny? We did it." They cut our fence, they ban us from town, they try everything they can think of to make us quit, and we just keep going. We dug a well with our bare hands because we had to. Rowan's expression shifted, and then he was laughing too. We're either very stubborn or very stupid. Both, definitely both. They stood there laughing like fools until the cold drove them back to the house. That night, Rowan opened a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving and poured them each a generous measure. To surviving winter, he said, raising his glass. To being too stubborn to quit, Abigail countered. They drank, and the whiskey burned warm all the way down. Abigail was studying Rowan across the table, noticing details she'd started cataloging without meaning to. The way his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned forward, the scar on his knuckles from some long-ago injury, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled. "What?" he asked, catching her staring. "Nothing, just thinking." "About what?" "About how different things are from when I first came here." "Different good or different bad?" "Different good," Abigail said. "Complicated, but good." Rowan reached across the table and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt weighted with meaning. "I'm glad you stayed," he said quietly. Abigail's heart was beating too fast again. "I'm glad you let me." They sat there, hands joined across the table, not saying anything else because words felt unnecessary. Later, when Abigail went upstairs to her room, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror. Her face was thinner, harder, weathered by sun and wind and labor. Her hands were calloused and scarred. She looked nothing like the girl who'd arrived at the ranch 8 months ago. She looked stronger, real. She looked like someone who'd built a life with her own hands and wasn't planning to let anyone take it away. Christmas came without celebration. They had no one to celebrate with, and neither of them felt particularly festive given the circumstances. But on Christmas morning, Abigail found a package on the kitchen table wrapped in brown paper. Rowan was outside doing morning chores. She opened it carefully and found a pair of thick leather work gloves lined with wool, the kind that would actually protect her hands during fence work and well digging. Quality gloves. Expensive gloves. There was no note, but she knew. She went upstairs and retrieved something she'd been working on in secret, a scarf she'd knitted from yarn she'd bought during one of their trips to Millbrook. The pattern was simple, but she'd made it herself, working on it late at night when she couldn't sleep. She left it on Rowan's chair by the fire. When he came in an hour later, she watched from the kitchen doorway as he found it. He picked it up, ran his fingers over the stitches, and something in his expression softened. "You made this?" he called. "It's not very good," Abigail said. "I haven't knitted in years." "It's perfect." He wrapped it around his neck immediately, despite the fact that they were inside where it was warm. They didn't talk about the gifts, didn't make a big production of gratitude. But Abigail noticed Rowan wearing the scarf every time he went outside for the next week. And he noticed her wearing the gloves. Small gestures, but they mattered. January brought a cold snap that lasted 3 weeks. Temperatures dropped so low that water froze in the pipes. Animals huddled together for warmth, and going outside felt dangerous. They spent more time indoors together, confined by weather. The house felt smaller, the proximity more intense. One evening, they were sitting by the fire after dinner when Rowan said, "Tell me something I don't know about you." Abigail looked up from the book she'd been reading. "Like what?" "Anything. We've been married 6 months, and I feel like I'm still learning who you are." "What do you want to know?" "I don't know. What did you want to be when you were younger, before everything got hard?" Abigail set down her book. "I wanted to be a teacher. I loved reading, loved the idea of helping other people learn. My mother used to save money so I could buy books from the traveling peddler who came through town twice a year." "What happened to that dream?" "My father gambled away the money she'd been saving for my schooling. Then my mother got sick and I had to take care of her. By the time she died, I was too old and too poor to go to school. So I became what I became, someone who cleaned other people's houses and hoped to survive." "You could still teach," Rowan said. "Maybe not in a school, but there are always kids who need tutoring. Families who'd pay for lessons." "Not for me. Not now." "Why not?" "Because I'm the woman who married Rowan Hale to escape scandal. No respectable family would let me near their children." Rowan's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No, but it's true." Abigail shook her head. "What about you? What did you want to be?" "Anything but a rancher." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. I hated this place growing up, hated watching my father turn mean and bitter because the land was hard and the work never ended, hated knowing I'd inherit it all and be expected to do the same. But you stayed. I stayed because running felt like admitting defeat, like letting my father win even after he was dead. He stared into the fire. But then I started changing things, running the ranch differently than he did, being different than he was. And somewhere along the way, I stopped hating it. Do you still wish you'd left? Sometimes. Mostly, I just wish people would see the ranch I've built instead of the one my father had. See me instead of him. I see you, Abigail said quietly. Rowan looked at her, saying, I know you do. That's why... He stopped, shook his head. Why what? Nothing. Never mind. But Abigail could see it in his eyes, something unsaid, something important. The moment stretched between them, charged and fragile. Then a log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks, and the spell broke. I should get some sleep, Abigail said, standing. Early morning tomorrow. Yeah, good night. Good night. She went upstairs, her heart still racing from whatever had almost happened. February brought the first signs that their isolation might be breaking. A man appeared at the ranch one morning, not from Cedar Ridge, but from a neighboring county. He was looking for horses to buy. Heard you breed good stock, he said to Rowan. Don't care about town politics. Just want quality animals. It was the first real business they'd had in months. Rowan sold him 3 horses at fair prices. When the man left, he looked almost surprised. Maybe things are changing, Abigail said. Or maybe he just doesn't know what we did to earn Cedar Ridge's wrath. Does it matter? He paid cash and he'll probably tell others. Over the next few weeks, 3 more people came to the ranch looking to do business. None of them mentioned the town ban. None of them seemed to care about gossip. Word was spreading that Rowan Hale's ranch had quality livestock and fair prices. And slowly, quietly, that reputation was starting to matter more than the scandal. We're doing it, Abigail said one evening, reviewing their improved finances, actually building something that works. Don't jinx it, Rowan warned, but he was smiling. That night, after dinner, Rowan asked, Want to learn to play chess? I don't know how. I'll teach you. He brought out a worn chess set and spent the next hour explaining the rules. Abigail was terrible at it, losing every game within 10 moves, but she laughed more than she had in weeks, and Rowan's competitive streak came out in ways that were entertaining rather than intimidating. You're letting me win, she accused during their 4th game. I'm absolutely not. You're just learning the patterns. Liar, he grinned. Maybe a little. They played until late, until Abigail's eyes were drooping with exhaustion. We should do this again, she said as she headed upstairs. Tomorrow night? Tomorrow night. It became their routine. After dinner, they'd play chess or read aloud to each other or just talk by the fire. The evenings stretched longer, neither of them quite ready to retreat to separate rooms. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the space between them narrowed. March arrived with a kind of warmth that promised spring might actually come. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass underneath, and the creek ran high with runoff. Abigail was in the vegetable garden, turning soil and planning what to plant, when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses. She straightened, her stomach tightening with the old familiar wariness that came with unexpected visitors. Rowan emerged from the barn, his posture immediately defensive. But as the riders came into view, his expression shifted to something closer to surprise. There were 5 of them, ranchers from neighboring properties, men Rowan knew by sight, if not by friendship. The lead rider, a grizzled man named Frank Garrison, raised his hand in greeting. Rowan? Got a minute? Depends on what you need it for, Rowan said cautiously. Garrison dismounted and the others followed. Heard you had trouble with your north fence couple months back, post-cut deliberate-like. What about it? We've had the same. 3 of us lost fence sections in the last month. Someone's targeting ranchers in this area, trying to cost us money and livestock. Rowan's jaw tightened. You know who? We got suspicions. Some of the younger men from Cedar Ridge making trouble because they're bored or mean or both. We're organizing to put a stop to it, and we could use your help. Why come to me? Garrison looked uncomfortable. Because whether we like your personal business or not, you're a good rancher and you know how to handle yourself. We need people we can count on. It wasn't exactly an apology for months of isolation, but it was something, an acknowledgement that business mattered more than gossip. Rowan glanced at Abigail. She gave him a small nod. "All right," he said. "What's the plan?" The men talked for an hour, working out patrols and strategies. When they left, Garrison tipped his hat to Abigail, a small gesture, but the first sign of respect she'd gotten from anyone outside the ranch in almost a year. "Things are changing," Abigail said once they were alone. "Maybe." Rowan didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe they just need something from us and they'll go back to hating us once they get it." "Does it matter? They're talking to us. That's more than they were doing before." "I suppose." But over the next few weeks, the change became undeniable. The patrols caught two young men cutting fence wire, not on Rowan's property, but on Garrison's. The sheriff from Millbrook was called in, arrests were made, and suddenly the sabotage stopped. More importantly, word spread that Rowan Hale had helped solve the problem, that he'd worked with other ranchers like a reasonable man, not the violent recluse people had believed him to be. The next time Rowan rode into Cedar Ridge for supplies, testing whether the ban would hold, the general store owner served him without comment. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. Progress in inches. April brought Abigail's first real test of the life she'd built. A woman appeared at the ranch one morning, well-dressed and riding a fine horse. She introduced herself as Mrs. Catherine Brennan from Millbrook. "I've heard you were a teacher," she said to Abigail, "or wanted to be." Abigail exchanged a glance with Rowan. "I wanted to be. I never had formal training. But you can read and write well? Do arithmetic?" "Yes." "My daughter needs tutoring. She's 12, bright but struggling with her reading. The school in Millbrook is overcrowded and the teacher doesn't have time for individual attention." Mrs. Brennan looked at Abigail directly. "I'll pay fair wages. $2 a week for 3 afternoons of lessons." It was more money than Abigail had expected. "Why me?" "Because Mrs. Garrison mentioned you, said you were educated and hardworking, and frankly, I don't care about whatever scandal you were involved in down in Cedar Ridge. I care about my daughter learning to read." Abigail felt something bloom in her chest. Hope, maybe, or vindication. "I'd be honored to teach her." They arranged for lessons to start the following week. Mrs. Brennan would bring her daughter to the ranch, stay during the lesson, and take her home after. When she left, Rowan was grinning. "A teacher? You're going to be a teacher." "Don't say it like that. It's just one student." "It's a start, and you'll be brilliant at it." The confidence in his voice made Abigail's throat tight. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. I've watched you learn everything about this ranch in less than a year. If you can master fence building and well digging, you can definitely teach a 12-year-old to read." The first lesson was terrifying. Abigail spent the entire morning preparing, rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd approach the material. But when Sarah Brennan arrived, a shy girl with dark braids and curious eyes, something clicked. Abigail remembered what it felt like to struggle with words, to want desperately to understand but not know how to ask for help. She taught the way she wished someone had taught her, patiently, without judgment, finding the parts that made sense and building from there. By the end of the lesson, Sarah was smiling. Mrs. Brennan looked pleased. "Same time next week?" she asked. "Same time," Abigail confirmed. After they left, Abigail sat on the porch feeling something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Pride in work that had nothing to do with physical labor or survival. Pride in using her mind, her skills, in helping someone else. Rowan found her there an hour later, still sitting and staring at nothing. "How'd it go?" he asked. I think it went well. I told you it would." "She wants to come back." "Of course she does." He sat beside her. "You're good at this, Abigail. You always were. You just never had the chance to prove it." She looked at him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For believing I could do this. For giving me the space to try." Rowan's expression softened. "You don't need to thank me for that. You did this yourself." But they both knew it wasn't that simple. Without the ranch, without Rowan defending her right to be here, she never would have had the opportunity. By May, Abigail had 3 students. Sarah Brennan, a boy named Thomas from a neighboring ranch, and a younger girl whose mother had heard about the lessons and begged Abigail to take her on. She taught them 3 afternoons a week in the main room of the house, which had become a makeshift classroom. Rowan built her a proper desk and brought her supplies from Millbrook: paper, pencils, books. The money she earned was hers. Rowan insisted on it. "You're working for it," he said. "It's yours to keep." It was the first money Abigail had ever earned that felt truly hers. Not wages for someone else's labor that she happened to perform. Her work, her skill, her money. She started saving it in a jar on her dresser, watching it grow week by week. One evening, counting the coins, she realized she had almost $30 saved. Enough to leave if she wanted. Enough to start over somewhere else. The thought came unbidden and unwelcome. She didn't want to leave. The realization sat heavy in her chest. When had that changed? When had the ranch stopped being a refuge and become home? When had Rowan stopped being just the man who gave her work and become what? Her partner, her friend, her husband, in ways that went beyond a paper certificate? She went downstairs and found him reading by the fire, his usual evening position. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked up. "Always." "Are you happy with how things turned out?" Rowan set down his book, giving her his full attention. "That's a complicated question." "I know, but I want to know." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I'm happier than I expected to be. Our marriage was supposed to be practical, a solution to a problem, but it became—" He paused, searching for words. "It became more than that. At least for me." Abigail's heart was pounding. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I like having you here. Not just because you work hard or because you're good company. I like seeing you at breakfast. I like knowing you're upstairs at night. I like watching you teach those kids and seeing how alive you look when you're doing it." He met her eyes. "I like being married to you. Actually married, not just legally." The words hung in the air between them. Abigail crossed the room and sat beside him. "I like being married to you too, more than I thought I would." "More than you thought you would," Rowan repeated with a slight smile. "That's quite an endorsement." "You know what I mean." "I do." His hand found hers, their fingers interlacing easily. "So what do we do about it?" "I don't know. This wasn't part of the agreement." "Then maybe we need a new agreement." Abigail looked at their joined hands, at the rings they both still wore. "What would that look like?" "However we want it to look. We make our own rules, remember?" "What do you want?" Rowan's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I want to stop pretending we're just business partners. I want to have dinner together because we enjoy each other's company, not because it's practical. I want to—" He stopped, swallowed. "I want to move forward with you, if that's what you want too." Abigail felt something unlock in her chest. All the months of careful distance, of maintaining boundaries, of pretending their marriage was only on paper, all of it fell away. "I want that too," she said quietly. Rowan's expression transformed, relief and joy and something deeper. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their first kiss was careful, tentative, testing. Then Abigail's hand came up to his face, and Rowan's arm went around her waist, and careful gave way to something real. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Abigail laughed softly. "What?" Rowan asked. "I just realized we've been married almost 9 months, and that was our first kiss. We've been doing this backwards. We've been doing everything backwards. Has it worked out so far?" Abigail looked at him, at this man who'd given her work when she had nothing, who'd married her to protect her, who'd become someone she couldn't imagine living without. "Yes," she said. "It's worked out perfectly." That night, Abigail didn't go upstairs to her separate room, and Rowan didn't suggest she should. They fell asleep on the sofa by the fire, tangled together, and woke up with the sun streaming through the windows and neck cramps from the awkward position. "We're too old to sleep on furniture," Rowan muttered, stretching. "Speak for yourself." He pulled her close and kissed her again, morning breath and all. "Good morning, wife." "Good morning, husband." It felt different saying it now, real in a way it hadn't been before. They had breakfast together, did the morning chores, fell back into their work rhythm. But everything was touched with new awareness. Rowan's hand on her back as he passed. Abigail's fingers brushing his when she handed him tools. Small touches that said we're together now. Actually, together. That evening, Abigail moved her belongings from the upstairs room to Rowan's room. It took all of 10 minutes. She still didn't own much. But standing in what was now their shared space, looking at her few dresses hanging beside his shirts, her books on the shelf next to his, felt monumental. "This okay?" Rowan asked from the doorway. "More than okay." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I never thought I'd have this. Someone to share things with." "Neither did I." They stood there holding each other, watching the sunset through the window, paint the sky in colors neither of them had words for. Summer came with heat that shimmered off the grassland and storms that rolled across the sky like artillery. The ranch thrived. Rowan sold livestock at good prices, the new well provided reliable water, and the vegetable garden Abigail tended produced more than they could eat themselves. She continued teaching, expanding to 5 students. Word had spread that she was good at it, patient and effective. Parents who wouldn't have given her the time of day a year ago were now paying her to educate their children. The money added up. Abigail contributed to ranch expenses now, a full partner in keeping the place running. One afternoon in July, they rode into Cedar Ridge together for the first time in months. Abigail had been avoiding it, not ready to face the people who'd tried so hard to drive her away. But Rowan needed supplies from the feed store, and Abigail needed books for her students, and they were tired of making the longer trip to Millbrook for everything. The town was busy with afternoon traffic. People noticed them immediately. Some stared. Some whispered. But no one said anything directly. At the feed store, the owner, Carl Henderson, who'd refused to serve Rowan months ago, looked up and his expression went carefully neutral. "Mr. Hale," he said, "what can I do for you?" "Need 50 pounds of grain, and wire if you've got it." Henderson nodded and started gathering the order without comment. Abigail watched the transaction, waiting for the hostility. It didn't come. Just business, cold and impersonal, but not actively cruel. At the bookstore, the owner actually smiled at Abigail. "Mrs. Hale, good to see you. I heard you're teaching now." "I am." "Sarah Brennan's mother was in here last week, raved about how much Sarah's reading has improved, said you're a natural teacher." The compliment caught Abigail off guard. "Thank you. I try. If you ever need books for your students, let me know. I can order them special." "I appreciate that." Walking back to the wagon, Abigail felt strange. "What just happened?" "You became useful," Rowan said. "People can overlook scandal if you're providing a service they need. That's cynical. That's reality. You're teaching their kids. That makes you valuable. And value outweighs judgment eventually." He was right, even if it rankled. People hadn't suddenly decided she was respectable. They decided she was useful, which in practical terms meant the same thing. On the ride home, Abigail said, "I don't know if I can forgive them for how they treated us." You don't have to forgive them, but you might have to live alongside them. That's not the same thing. No, but it's enough. Abigail thought about that. Living alongside people who'd tried to destroy her, working with them when necessary, but never forgetting what they'd done. It wasn't forgiveness, but maybe it was survival of a different kind. In August, Frank Garrison stopped by the ranch with an invitation. "We're having a community barn raising," he said. "For the Hendersons. Their barn burned down last month. Everyone's pitching in. Could use your help, Rowan. You too, Mrs. Hale, if you're willing." It was the first time they'd been invited to anything communal since the marriage. Abigail looked at Rowan. "What do you think?" "Up to you," he said. "I'll go if you want to, or we can skip it." She thought about it. Part of her wanted to refuse out of spite. But another part, the part that was tired of isolation, that wanted to be part of something bigger than just their ranch, wanted to accept. "We'll be there," she told Garrison. The barn raising was scheduled for a Saturday. They arrived early with tools and food Abigail had prepared. There were at least 50 people there, more than Abigail had seen gathered in one place since she'd arrived in Cedar Ridge. Some she recognized, most she didn't. The reception was mixed. Some people greeted them warmly. Others offered cool nods. A few turned away entirely. But no one asked them to leave. They worked alongside neighbors all day, raising frames, hammering boards, hauling materials. The work was hard and hot and exhausting. During a break, Abigail found herself near a group of women preparing food. She recognized Mrs. Cranshaw among them. Their eyes met. Mrs. Cranshaw's expression was complicated. Not quite apologetic, but not hostile either. "Mrs. Hale," she said finally. "Mrs. Cranshaw." An awkward silence stretched. Then one of the other women, someone Abigail didn't know, said, "I heard you're teaching the Brennan girl. How is that going?" And just like that, the tension broke. They talked about teaching, about children, about the normal mundane things that filled daily life. Mrs. Cranshaw didn't apologize for sending her away. Abigail didn't ask her to. But when the conversation ended and they went back to their separate tasks, something had shifted. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement that they existed in the same world and would have to find a way to navigate it. By sunset, the barn was standing. Everyone gathered for a communal meal, tables loaded with food, children running wild, men passing bottles and slapping backs. Rowan and Abigail sat slightly apart from the main group, still not quite integrated, but no longer completely separated either. "This is strange," Abigail said, watching the festivities. "What is?" "Being here. Being part of this. After everything. You don't have to be part of it if you don't want to." "I know, but I think—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I think I'm tired of fighting, of always being against everyone. Maybe it's time to just be." Rowan's hand found hers under the table. "I like the sound of that." They stayed until the stars came out, until children were falling asleep in their parents' arms, and the bottles were empty, and everyone was too tired to do anything but head home. On the ride back to the ranch, Abigail leaned against Rowan's shoulder. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For coming, for standing beside me, for all of it. You don't have to thank me for that. That's just what we do." And it was. What they did. What they'd built together. The fall brought Abigail's biggest surprise yet. A delegation from Cedar Ridge arrived at the ranch one afternoon. Judge Morrison, Mayor Hutchins, and two women Abigail recognized from the barn raising. "Mrs. Hale," Morrison said formally, "we'd like to speak with you about a proposition." Abigail exchanged a glance with Rowan, who looked just as confused. "What kind of proposition?" "The town school is struggling. Our teacher, Miss Albright, is elderly and planning to retire at the end of the term. We need someone to replace her." Morrison paused. "We'd like to offer you the position." Abigail stared at him. "You want me to teach at the town school?" "Yes. You've proven yourself capable with private students. Several parents have specifically requested you. The salary would be $40 a month plus housing if needed." "Housing if needed?" Abigail repeated slowly. "I have housing. I have a home." "Of course. We simply meant—" Morrison looked uncomfortable. "You meant you're offering me a way to be respectable," Abigail said. "To be separate from my husband, living independently in town like a proper unmarried teacher." "We're offering you employment," Hutchins cut in. "Good employment." "Why now? A year ago you were trying to force me to leave. What's changed?" One of the women spoke up. "You've changed. Or perhaps we have. You've proven yourself to be exactly what you claimed, a hard worker trying to build a life. And we need good teachers more than we need to nurse old grudges." It was more honesty than Abigail had expected. She looked at Rowan. He gave her the slightest nod. "Your choice." "I appreciate the offer," Abigail said carefully, "but I need time to think about it." "Of course. Take a week. We'll need an answer by then." After they left, Abigail sat on the porch steps feeling dizzy. "That was unexpected," Rowan said. "That was them trying to control me in a different way, offering me respectability if I'll just conform to what they think I should be. Is that how you see it? Isn't it?" Rowan sat beside her. "Maybe. Or maybe it's them recognizing that you're good at something and trying to use that skill for the community. The motivations can be complicated and still result in a real opportunity. Do you want me to take it?" "What I want doesn't matter. This is your choice." "It matters to me." He was quiet for a moment. "I want you to have what makes you happy. If that's teaching at the school, taking the job, building something bigger than private lessons, then yes, I want you to take it. If it's staying here and teaching from the ranch, I want that too. I just want you to choose what you actually want, not what you think you should want." Abigail leaned against him. "What if I don't know what I want?" "Then we figure it out together." She spent 3 days wrestling with the decision. The school job meant stability, prestige, a place in the community she'd been denied. It meant teaching more students, having real resources, being part of something established. But it also meant conforming to their expectations, playing by their rules, becoming the respectable widow-type teacher they could accept. On the fourth day, she made her choice. She rode into town alone and found Judge Morrison at his office. "I've considered your offer," she said, "and I'm declining." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "May I ask why?" "Because I don't need your approval to teach. I've built something that works from my home. My students are learning, their parents are happy, and I'm earning fair wages. I don't need the town school to validate what I already know I'm capable of." "You're making a mistake. This is a respected position." "Respect that comes with conditions isn't really respect," Abigail interrupted. "I've spent enough of my life trying to earn approval from people who were never going to give it freely. I'm done with that." "So you'll continue teaching from the ranch?" "Yes. And if parents want to send their children to me, they're welcome. If they prefer the town school, that's their choice. But I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not just to make you all more comfortable with my existence." Morrison studied her. "You've become quite stubborn, Mrs. Hale." "I've always been stubborn. I've just stopped apologizing for it." She left his office feeling lighter than she had in days. When she got home and told Rowan her decision, he smiled. "Good. You think I did the right thing?" "I think you did what was right for you. That's what matters." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they'd established over the months, this quiet time together at the end of each day. "Do you ever regret it?" Abigail asked. "Marrying me?" "No. Do you?" "No. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't come here, if Mrs. Cranshaw had sent me somewhere else, or if you'd turned me away that first day." "You'd have found somewhere else to land," Rowan said confidently. "You're too stubborn to have failed completely." "Maybe. But I wouldn't have this." "This?" Abigail gestured at the ranch, at the home they'd built, at the life they shared. "All of it. A husband who respects me, work that matters, a place that's actually mine." "Ours," Rowan corrected. "Ours," she agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Later that night, lying in bed, Rowan said into the darkness, "I love you." It was the first time either of them had said it. Abigail rolled over to face him. "I love you too. I know we didn't start this way, but I know. Me too." It wasn't a fairy tale. They'd started from desperation and defiance, built something practical that became something real. It was messy and complicated and nothing like what either of them had imagined love would be. But it was theirs. And it was enough. The years that followed weren't easy. The ranch demanded constant work. Some people in town never fully accepted them. Money was always tight, and winters were always hard. But they endured. Abigail's teaching practice grew to 8 regular students. She saved enough money to buy real textbooks and supplies. Parents started recommending her to others, and her reputation spread beyond Cedar Ridge. Rowan expanded the ranch operations, breeding horses that became known throughout the territory for their quality. The business that had nearly collapsed under the town's ban became more successful than it had been in his father's time. They worked together, building something neither could have built alone. 3 years after their wedding, a young woman appeared at the ranch looking for work. She'd been turned away from the boarding house in town, had nowhere to go, was desperate and afraid. Abigail saw herself in that girl's eyes. She gave her a job helping with the teaching and the household work. Fair wages, room and board, and most importantly, respect. The girl stayed. Then another came, and another. Without planning it, Abigail had created something new. A place where women with nowhere else to go could find work and safety and a chance to build themselves back up. It wasn't charity, it was opportunity. The same opportunity Rowan had given her. 5 years after her arrival at the ranch, Abigail stood on the porch one morning, watching the sun rise over land that felt as much hers as the breath in her lungs. She'd come here with nothing, sent away like garbage by people who thought she'd fail. Instead, she'd built a life. A real life with work that mattered and people who needed her and a man who loved her not despite her history, but because of who she'd become in spite of it. The girl they'd expected to come back broken, or not come back at all, had instead become unbreakable. Rowan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" about how wrong they were. Everyone who thought I'd fail. They weren't wrong about you. They were wrong about what failure looks like. Abigail turned in his arms. What do you mean? They thought failure meant coming back to town, admitting you couldn't handle the work, letting them be right. But you did something worse than that. You succeeded in ways they never imagined. You built something they can't control or diminish or take away. That's real power. I never wanted power. No, you wanted choice, and now you have it. She thought about all the choices she'd made, to stay, to work, to marry him, to teach, to turn down the town school, to help other women find their footing. Each choice had been hers, made freely, without apology. That was worth more than any approval the town could offer. Come on, Rowan said. We've got work to do. We always have work to do. And we always will. That's what building a life looks like. They went inside together, ready to face whatever the day brought, because that's what they did. What they'd always done. They survived. They worked. They chose each other every single day. And in a world that had tried so hard to break them, that was its own kind of victory. Years later, when people asked Abigail about her story, about how she'd ended up at Rowan Hale's ranch and what had happened there, she always gave the same answer. I went because I had no other choice. I stayed because I found something worth choosing. And when they pressed for details, for scandal or drama or the kind of story people love to tell, she smiled and said nothing more. Because the real story wasn't about scandal. It was about survival. About two people who'd been judged and dismissed and written off learning to trust each other. About building something real from absolutely nothing. It was about choosing your own path even when everyone else has already decided where you should go. That was the story. The only one that mattered, and it belonged to her and Rowan alone. Not to the town that had tried to destroy them, not to the people who'd watched and whispered and waited for them to fail. It belonged to them, and that was enough.